Although we are sharing this year's events virtually, the festival is based in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and we respectfully acknowledge the land on which we gather as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, whose culture has been lost forever and can never be recovered. We also acknowledge the island of Uktahumguk, Newfoundland, as the unceded traditional territory of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq, and we acknowledge Labrador as the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Innu of Ntsinan, the Inuit of Nunatsiavut, and the Inuit of Nunatuhavut. We recognize all First Peoples who are here before us, those who live with us now, and the 7 generations to come. As First Peoples have done since time immemorial, we strive to be responsible stewards of the land and to respect the cultures, ceremonies, and traditions of all who call it home. As we open our hearts and minds to the past, we commit ourselves to working in a spirit of truth and reconciliation to make a better future for all.
Okay, so first of all, congratulations. The film is wonderful. I got a chance to have a little preview of it earlier this week um, here at home. And I really loved so many things about Don, Her Dad, and the Tractor that I tried to come up with a few questions to guide us, but I just want us to have a great conversation. So let's just do that. The film is touched by grief, but also understanding. I think real tension, and also some lighter moments, some real humor, which was, so welcome as I was watching. I wanted to start just in the most general way. Shelley, if we can start with you, just can you tell me why this story? Why was this? Why are you compelled to write this one as your first feature, and where did the story come from for you?
I think the answer to both is, was timing, definitely. I was just finishing up my term time at the CFC in the writers program there when my son let us know that he was going to begin to transition. And so the world changed complexion in a big way for me. At that point, my focus became quite different. I think I've said many times that when you have a child, and an only child for me, he's my only child, your child's preoccupations and issues and concerns and challenges become yours. And so for me, as I had been working on lots of other projects, but this story emerged as I talked to friends about where we were as a family, and heard other stories of where other people were as families. And it came directly from my experience and talking with my son, and getting to know his new community a little bit.
I'm going to throw more or less the same question to Maya. What was it about Shelley's script that felt compelling to you, that made you want to do this one?
Yeah, I feel like this is an interesting, unique story within the trans experience because it's set in a rural community. And I think it's really important to tell these rural stories. I came from a small town in Ontario myself, and so there was a lot of parallels between my own transition journey and Dawn's. And so I think it's important to explore that and explore how important family, friends, and community can be when they support a trans person's experience and how much of an impact that can have on their life. So I felt like it was really important, and it didn't sensationalize the experience in any way. And it was just all about the humanity and the human connection.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about that decision to place a story in a rural setting, or like really anywhere that's outside of the center, like the big C center, right? So, I'm always really interested in that. I grew up in Toronto myself, and now I live here in Newfoundland, and I really feel that difference all the time. So, can we talk about that, what the greater challenges are for kids who, like trans kids who are growing up outside the center? And I guess, you've sort of touched on a little bit, in terms of feeling that it is important, but I was watching and I was thinking, so why come home? Do you know what I mean? When the center is so much more welcoming, why come home?
Maya, just butt in anytime. I mean, Maya's experience, well, unique to Maya, isn't unique, and my experience as a parent living in a rural community in northern Nova Scotia, I saw, and indeed my son's experience of living in a rural community, I saw queer kids and trans kids who were struggling to find place and community in their communities. So that was the first reason, because it seemed to me that there was a need to say, you know what, trans individuals are everywhere. This is not new. This is not unique to cities. The way it's dealt with, the way it's viewed, and perhaps the challenges that trans individuals face in cities is different, I suspect. But that was what was really significant to me. And I, as a writer of different stuff, I am really interested in the rural lives of women. And in terms of why Dawn is coming home, they say in Nova Scotia, everybody comes home. Everybody comes home eventually. So, I mean, there was no resisting that. But certainly, you know, we explore a little bit in the script that Dawn has made her mom, who has known her secret, she's made her a promise that she will come and repair this family rift that began 5 years ago. So that's why she hasn't got a choice, in a way. She feels she has to do this, whether she's going to stay or not. I think that's a whole nother question. But yeah, does that answer your question, Maya?
Yeah, I was just really like, that was sort of where my mind went while I was watching. Maya, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, definitely. I think that for LGBT people, there's always a part of themselves that's rooted in their upbringing and where they came from. For me, it's like that. And I think that you always have that connection to home, as Shelley says. And there's a part of you that always wants to go back home, especially if you do have supportive family. So sometimes you can encounter people you know in small towns. It's a small community, right? And so you're bound to have awkward interactions with people who maybe knew you before you transitioned. And so this film does a great job of showing those awkward moments, and maybe how people's intent isn't malicious, but it just requires patience and growth and learning to be able to adapt to this new experience. And so that's something that I think is really important to talk about. And I think Dawn as a character, she's definitely teetering back and forth on the how long will I stay? Are people going to deal with who I am now? Are they going to accept me? Am I going to feel welcomed? Or am I going to go back to the city and not want to return? And so that's one of the challenges that Dawn faces in this film. And I think that's something that's very true for queer people. Growing up in a small town, you don't always have a community you can connect with, because we represent a smaller portion of the population, but we do exist everywhere. And so I think it's very crucial to show that acceptance can be found in smaller communities, and that we should strive for that, so that we don't always feel that we need to go to a city to connect with other queer people. And I also think that the internet is doing a great job of connecting us now as well. For me, growing up, I didn't even have high-speed internet until I was just graduating high school. And so I didn't really have anyone to connect to, and there was no community for me online. So I think it's definitely changing, and I think it's important to feel safe no matter where you are, whether that's in a small town or a big city.
I agree, and I just want to add to that you know, a lot of the representations we've seen of trans individuals so far in the media and on our screens have been in cities. And they've been people coping with the complexity of urban life, which can often be grittier, harder, less palatable for family audiences and young audiences. And I really wanted to try and create something that was going to airbrush out the difficulties or airbrush out the grit or discomfort, because you know there's going to be that, but that was going to give us an opportunity to see a different set of circumstances where, you know, where people were used to connecting, we're used to knowing each other in small communities, and we're not automatically put into that big city sense of alienation and loneliness, which there can be a lot of that in both places, but smaller communities offer in some ways completely different challenges, and I was interested in those.
Well, absolutely. And it's very much a film about, I mean, it's a film about family, but in the wider sense, I think also about community, right? And you could really feel that in everyone's reactions to Dawn as well. One of the things that I thought was interesting was the dichotomy that was set up a little bit in the community's reactions, because you have the character of Banu, who's like come from away, who's not from there, and that that's I guess generates a different feeling, right? Well, this person has come from outside, whereas Dawn is coming home, right? Which is quite different. Did you think about that, writing that dichotomy in, or did you just want to give Dawn sort of, a tether, I guess, a little bit?
I think I was wanting to create little spider webs of connection between Dawn and Banu, and that come from away situation was one way of doing it. But also the way Banu had come into this town and had discovered a community that was welcoming and warm, and she was a positive, or were a positive force in that town and that community, and they met their challenges with a kind of humor and grace and wit, and I wanted an opportunity to see Dawn letting her guard down a bit with somebody she recognized, and I think she recognizes that in Banu and welcomes it.
Yeah, and what an interesting way to I guess give us like a visual, like a character representation of, there is actually hope for this community. There's, there's something potentially to stick around for. I was interested in the I guess continuum of reactions, which I thought was so well done. That everyone's reaction was a little bit different. The sister has this sort of big reaction at first, but I think gets over it quite quickly. And then you have these sort of different moments, right? You have the moment with the neighbor bringing the casserole, who just sort of can't cope, and she has this can't cope moment, and this, I guess, trajectory right to Marty, who's violent. Can you talk a little bit about crafting those characters and what you were thinking of?
Yeah, and I think, again, I would encourage Maya to talk about this, because we talked a little bit about, her experience. And I think Maya's experience and my son's experience and my experience through my son, and when I'm standing with my son, we have seen the whole gamut, to individuals stopping us on the street and starting to cry because they have a granddaughter that's queer and they don't know how to cope, and how did we do it? And I think for me as a parent, I kind of wanted to craft my own experience, my own set of feelings in each of those characters, because everything that you saw in every character, including the anger and confusion in Marty, I think as a parent, I felt at some point in our journey. And I think in my responses, I wasn't necessarily always pretty. Not that I didn't, not that I would ever have rejected my son or his experience, but I found, and I don't know if Maya would speak to her parents' experience in this, but I found that what I was giving up wasn't the person per se, but was the idea of what that person represented in my life going forward. So a whole set of expectations that are gender-based, a whole set of expectations that meant I had a female child who would at some point perhaps have children that would be my grandchildren, who would have a way, crazy things. Now I go,
sure, yeah,
crazy things, but those things were things that I grew up with and that I expected. And, you know, I had longed when I had a baby, I had longed to have a female baby. And, you know, so these were things that I had to really look hard at and reassess and figure out where was I coming from and what mattered. Maya, do you have thoughts on that? Like,
Yeah, definitely. I think I have a bunch of anecdotes from my own experience as well that I think reflect a lot of what you're saying. For instance, the range of different reactions is very true. I went to my sister's graduation after I had transitioned, and of course, there's a lot of people in the community and family friends that come to support, and also their kids are graduating. And so I encountered old teachers, maybe who didn't recognize who I was, or a family friend who asked if I must be a cousin because I look related, and it's my sisters, right? And so it's those experiences where you're like, okay, do I tell them, or do I just like go along with it because I'm only seeing them for this short micro moment in time? And so it's not worth bringing up this huge conversation with every person you meet, you know? And so you have those experiences like with Sandra on the steps where they maybe realize and they're shocked and they don't know what to say. And so then they'd rather not say anything at all and just leave and then take time to process to themselves. And then as well, Shelley saying that she kind of mourns the idea of the person prior to the transition. That was something that also was brought to me as well. One of my aunts, I was really close with one of my male cousins growing up, and we would shoot little home videos together, put sketches together. We would play video games together. We would hang out all the time, and we had this great relationship that was awesome. And after I transitioned and spent time away in the city, she came up to me and she was like, "Hey, like, it's actually been very difficult for your cousin to process your transition because the idea of who you were before is gone, and that relationship will never quite be the same because of gender um, differences. In a sense, like, I'm the same person, but the idea of who they thought I was then is now gone, you know? And it's something we've gotten over and we've learned to grow and change from, you know? Like, it's all an experience of learning to change your perception of someone. It's interesting because as a trans person, I might always have this idea in my head of who I am, and then I transition, but it could still be shocking to people, you know? You don't know how other people see you sometimes until you transition. And so I definitely felt for him because in a way he didn't know what it meant for our relationship anymore, you know? And so there's definitely a lot of mourning, I think, that happens to some degree. And I'm sure I could have that conversation with my mom as well. And maybe there was some ideas she had for me as an adult that are no longer going to happen. But you learn to accept the changes and to appreciate the person you have before you and recognize that we are the same. We might look different and we might fit into society in a different way now than you had perceived before, but we are still your kid. We're still the same. We have all the memories from before, and we just take that forward with us into who we are today.
Can we talk a little bit about Dawn, like Dawn and Maya? Because Dawn is so, like, she's kind of almost stalwart. She's kind of like private, and it's so interesting for me to get to watch you talk now, you know, in your own persona. So Dawn is, like, I think quite different in the way that she's approaching everything, because she is very private. She is, you know, yes, I said almost stalwart. Whereas you've been quite public in terms of, you know, talking about this and via YouTube and everything. So what commonality did you find with Dawn, or did you, you know, or?
Yeah, definitely. I think part of my reason for being so open and vocal about it was because I began my transition in 2014, and there wasn't a lot of resources for other people and for myself as well to connect with and to figure out how to navigate transitioning. And so for me, it was kind of chronologing my own journey from the very beginning before I even met with the doctor to discuss medical transition. And so I wanted to share that experience and then just talk about everything open and honestly, because I knew that it could help other people. And I think For Dawn, I can definitely appreciate her perspective of wanting to keep things private, because I think there's always points for me as well where I'm like, did I overshare? Like, would I like to just have these moments be private going forward? I think that we always need to respect trans people's privacy, and that's a really important lesson as well, because the media always tries to focus maybe on the less important stuff in someone's transition, like the physical aspects and the surgeries and the sensationalization of before and after. And so I think Dawn's character moves away from that kind of narrative, and it's more about her experience as a person rather than all of these like physical things. And I definitely connect with Dawn on that, but I do agree with you. Dawn and I are very different people, and where my self-defense is kind of just sharing my experience and venting to people and just opening up and being an open book. Her defense is being more private, and it's having maybe trust issues with certain people because of being wronged in the past. And I think it's very valid, and I think it's important to explore trans people who are more private, because not everyone wants to be an open book. Trans people don't exist to be activists just because they're trans. They don't need to educate everyone around them. It's not their job, and it's very exhausting to have that put on you while you're also trying to transition and deal with all these emotions. So I think it's a very fair character assessment of someone who maybe doesn't want to take on that loud and proud activist role, and who has a more quiet way of approaching her experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and it's there's like a family connection too, because of course John Andrew is so quiet, right? They're actually very, very similar in the way that they process emotionally all the time on screen. I want to go back to in the last question we were talking about things, and you used the word grief, and I just want to talk about grief, the theme of grief in the film a little bit. Shelley, this might be more for you, but again, I like everybody talking all the time, so it's excellent. But there are some just beautiful, nuanced moments of grief in this film, and I think you're maybe like 90 seconds in when John Andrew finds that single strand of his wife's hair caught in the banister, and I literally was like, is this what I'm going to be like? Am I crying already? Right? But it was such a quiet and gorgeous moment that set up that theme of grief. So it did make me think about structurally, because I'm a writer, so whenever I watch anything, I'm looking at the structure all the time. Structurally, the film being focused around an event. And it's neat for me because I just interviewed someone else, Milica Tomovic, about her film, also at the festival. And it is also structured around an event, and that film is structured around a child's birthday party, but it's really about the adults' extreme nihilism in the face of war. Whereas this film, which is really about the character of Dawn, is structured around this fulcrum of this event, which is a funeral. And so I just wanted to talk about that. When you're thinking about it on a script base or a story basis, why a funeral? Because I think, there'd be different ways to write this. It could have been a family wedding. It could have been the birth of a child. There'd be lots of reasons for Dawn's mother to extract this promise from her to come home. So yeah, why a funeral?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing was that because what I was thinking about in terms of the parents was grief. I was thinking about, like, I'm not a trans individual. I can't write a trans individual's story truthfully and honestly. And I needed a lot of help and a lot of support and information, but I could write the story of a trans individual's parent. And I could write the story of my personal experience, which encompassed a wide range of things, but certainly at the beginning, a big element of it was understanding the kind of bereavement that I felt, and how to cope with that, and how to move forward, and how to understand that the most important thing to me was my son's safety, happiness, and health. I mean, that was it. So that's why grief, grief and a funeral, that there didn't seem to be any question. And also, this is so woo-woo, so forgive me, but I don't know if you find, Elizabeth, but I do find that, as I'm working on another project at the moment, and I do find that characters and situations just start to happen and you don't necessarily have control of them. And something kind of just keeps coming out and coming. You're going, whoa, okay, all right, well, like that. It's not, and I don't mean it to be weird or spooky or anything like that. I just think that when we get in our little worlds and we start imagining these people and we let these people we follow them a bit, we kind of see where they go. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that, the funeral became important, but then if we were going to have a funeral and it was in a northern Nova Scotia town, then inevitably we were going to have a wake, and, how is that different? And is it different? And does it matter? And, all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, that's why that event. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. It's so, as again, I say, as a writer, it's fascinating for me that you're able to say, well, I knew I could write this story from a parent's perspective, and yet you removed the mother altogether, which I think is so, that's such a writer thing to do. It's like, I don't know, just the sort of, it allowed you, I think, a bird's eye view on the family in a way that would have been different. It would have been different if you'd chosen a different kind of story structure. Absolutely. I have a couple more questions. So one of them is strictly like for people like me who are so interested in the industry. Shelley, you had so much support for this film before it was even made. So you won the Women in the Director's Chair Feature Film Award, which helped fund the film. But this script was also one of 10 invited to the Breaking Through the Lens program at Cannes, and one of 12 invited to the New York Writers Lab, which is the program that's supported by Meryl Streep and Nicole Kidman. So it's a wild amount of support and well-deserved. But I just wanted to know if you could just talk to that process and that experience.
Yeah, I mean, they were very different experiences. They both, the WIDC, where I took Dawn, was the first place I took Dawn, and then the Writers Lab and the Breaking Through the Lens, all very different experiences, all offering me different things. The WIDC provided me with a group of peers who I'm still in touch with, and we still talk and we still support each other through processes of creating stuff. So I highly recommend that organization. The Writers Lab in New York, it's funny because as a writer, you're always looking for validation that your voice or your story is worth hearing, that anybody cares about it. And that's, we all need that. And so both that and the Breaking Through the Lens gave me that validation. I thought, okay, people are interested in this story. They're interested in this community. I need to keep pushing this. I mean, I'm a bit of a zealot, I do feel a certain responsibility, and I do want this representation to be there. And so to hear those places offered this support was great. I don't think it always spoke to the excellence of the script. I mean, I see all the flaws. I'm proud of the script and I'm proud of what we did, but I also think that what people were really responding to was an emotional sense of the importance of validating this community. And I think that they realized too that this was a very different type of film, and that it offered an opportunity for families to come to understand something that previously had been left a little bit more to the fringes of potentially violent, angry, difficult scripts, which were not necessarily accessible to a broad range of people. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So before we wrap up, had one more question that's for both of you, which is a working question. Tell me about filming in COVID, because this was shot last year in 2020 in the middle of a global pandemic. And I'm just interested to know, I mean, you were in Nova Scotia, which, you know, was certainly still in a better situation than lots of places. But, you know, can you speak to how did that change, you know, the way that you work? Did it change the story?
Well, and I'll let Maya take some of this, although I know it was her first feature, so I don't know how she'll feel about that. But yeah, it did change how we worked a bit, you know, although, you know, directors still talk to actors, and I, as often as not, I was getting in close and personal to have a conversation, then going, oh shit, putting my mask back on and stuff like that. We were, it felt like we were working very fast because we were up against, but I mean, I think that's independent filmmaking. You just, you know, 18 days to shoot this film was just, it was crazy. Like we were doing so many lines a day. I mean, you know, strips on the call sheet. So yeah, the most difficult part of it for me was the post production, because I found it really hard not to be in a room with people doing the color correct, with people doing the sound, seeing the thing on a large size screen right through the process, so that we had real calibration of what we were doing. So much was give a note, take a note, dig, you know, like it was just, I found that really hard and very, very time consuming. It really extended our time frame of getting this fully finished. So I found, boy, I would never do that again if I could avoid it. Like,
Yeah, I mean, as you said, this is my first feature film, so I don't have a lot to compare it to, but I honestly, I found that it was still great. It was a little bit difficult meeting everyone at once, and everyone's wearing masks, and then you don't really know what they look like, and then they take their mask off at lunch break and you're like, oh, that's what you look like, you know?
oh, you're
So
so cute.
yeah, and so it's just like different from that perspective. But yeah, I don't know, we made it work. Like I thought it was great. I had such a fun experience and it was amazing. I think even considering the fact it was one of the first few films in Nova Scotia to film during the pandemic, I don't even think I had really processed the pandemic quite as much as I have to this day. So looking back, it seems quite normal. But at the time, it was strange to be wearing the masks and doing all these protocols, and we would check in and get our temperature checked and all this stuff. I think maybe the only hard part was just the quarantining for 14 days when I came to Nova Scotia. And so that was just the only weird part, because you're just by yourself for 14 days. And then all of a sudden you're fresh on the set of the film, meeting so many people at once. So that was weird to go from isolation to extreme socializing. So, but it was really cool and it was fun. And I'm so happy that we got to make it happen, because I didn't know if we would, what with the whole world in an upset last summer. So yeah, it was great.
Well, you all did a wonderful job, and thank you so much for persevering through a global pandemic. I want to thank you so much for being here with us today. Again, my name is Elizabeth, and it was a real pleasure to speak with you both.
Thank you
Thank you,
so much.
Elizabeth.
Thank you so much for watching the film. And I'm thrilled to pieces that it's at St. John's. It's a wonderful festival, and I hope people realize how lucky they are to have it. It's great.